Pilots, welcome to the Calm Cockpit, the podcast that helps you fly smarter and stress less. We know that mental health has become a bit of a buzzword these days, but we know that at the end of the day, you need actionable steps to help you move forward. We wanted to create this podcast to address stress, fatigue, anxiety, and things that aviators encounter daily, while providing an actionable path forward to improve your performance and your cognitive skills. I'm John Niehaus.
And I'm Gita Brown. Welcome to the Calm Cockpit Podcast.
Onyx 1-2 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
On today's show, we're going to share the origin story of the podcast and how you can use this as your new resource to enhance your performance and safety while also improving your well-being. Pilot mental health and pilot physical health are coming to the forefront of discussions on the career track, in training at all levels, and even the FAA is beginning to shift the norms around transparency on pilot well-being. We fly in a very demanding environment that is unforgiving of preparation and lack of mental sharpness, and we all strive for that next level of skill that will help us fly safer. But sometimes the demands of our personal lives, career pressure, or lack of attention to our physical health can lead to our personal and mental health taking a back seat to our high performance achievement. And this is where the Calm Cockpit fits into your flight plans, providing you with resources, skills, and actionable strategies to mitigate stress, improve your well-being, and fly your best. And I really hope that by hearing a bit of the origin story of the show, that you'll find yourself reflected in the challenges and successes we'll talk about, and start to reflect on what is working in your own approach to well-being, and maybe where there is a little room for growth. So I think it would be super fun to hear a little bit of the professional background of the two of us, mostly because I think our dream team here of John and I, we are so very different and we do complement each other very well. John has a great backstory. You'll hear a strong background in aviation. I have a strong background in education and particularly in the mental health performance training zone that you'll hear about. And I'm a new aviator. So I would love to start and ask John to tell us a little bit about your amazing, what has it been, 20 plus years in aviation, how you got started, how all this happened, and also a little bit about why you wanted to create this show for people.
Yeah, so not quite more than 20. So let's not wish this all away just yet. I am hitting right about 20 years since I started flying, and it's kind of hard to believe that it's gone that quickly. I sort of got into it kind of by accident. I was thinking in high school one day what I was going to do. We just had a career counselor, and at the time I was reading a book where one of the main characters was a pilot, and I think my brain went to, those guys make money and don't work that hard. So maybe that seems like the thing I should probably do.
This is the mind of a teen boy, right?
Right. Lo and behold, I can't say that was entirely correct, although I have 20 years later more free time than a lot of other professionals. So some of it turned out to be true. But it turns out that, I've loved every minute of it. I ended up going to Western Michigan University for my collegiate experience. And in the process, I also gained some business acumen through a business degree as well. So I've got a little bit of both, and that led me into a lengthy flight instructor career, of which I also ended up as program director for the National Association of Flight Instructors, which I most recently retired from. I call it retire because, I don't want to, quitting is such a firm word. I don't like that. And so if you've ever heard me before, there's a chance maybe you heard me on the More Right Rudder podcast, which was something I used to host on a regular. And as far as the inspiration to this, well, I missed it. So I had to drag somebody else into my dream of having a podcast show of my own. our own, should I say. After many years of flight instruction, I went to the airlines briefly and realized that, that really wasn't for me, which was a bit of a head case moment for me. We'll talk about later. Ended up in private charter, and that was kind of the best of both worlds for me. It was sort of a dynamic environment. I love the challenge of constantly going to places that you've never been to before, that nobody tells you how to do it. You got to figure it out on your own. And that led me into putting my flight instructor hat back on, which was as a training captain. So I had the opportunity to not just sort of fly in that environment, but teach others how to fly in that environment. Most of which it was their first jet, which comes with its own challenges and fun. And just about, almost 3 years ago now, I started a Part 91 flying experience role, flying a Gulfstream 600 for a Fortune 500 company. And I'm putting my learning hat back on because now everything I've ever done has been domestic with, Mexico and Canada and the Caribbean, which really doesn't count. And so I'm now the student, and I'm learning to go to all these other cool places in the world. Has anybody ever heard of Europe or Asia? There's other places outside of North America. And that's been a lot of fun for me. So that's kind of my experience in a nutshell. We can talk about the inspiration a little bit later, but I want to hear more about you.
You've done so much in flying. You've had so many different experiences, and I just think it's fascinating that it seems like every time you sort of get to a level where I don't want to say you're comfortable, but where you sort of know the ropes and you know what you're doing, you seem like the kind of person who's then looked around and said, well, what other challenge could I do? Is that accurate?
I'd say that's true. Yeah. And, it's funny. One of the most profound things that somebody told me while I was hosting the other podcast, it was a instructor and airline pilot by the name of Jim Pittman. And we basically made an entire episode about goal chasing. Yes, it keeps you engaged, and yes, it has this drive for you. But at the same time, as pilots, we constantly look for the next thing. You get your private, okay, what's next? Instrument, what's next? Commercial. And so rarely do we take the opportunity to slow down enough to go, I did something that like 1% of the population has ever done. This is kind of a big deal. So it's as fun as that is to be goal chasing. It's also difficult to slow down and sort of reflect on what those things are.
Seems to me there might be an idea for a podcast in there.
Maybe.
And as you're saying goal chasing, I look back over my career and I'm like, yeah, I resemble that remark for sure. It's a fine line, right, between improving one's skills, but recognizing that the mastery really lies in the mastery of the fundamentals of whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. So, I could not be more different aviation-wise. I'm a midlife, brand new baby beginner student pilot. Hooray. So I'm coming at it, learning it at a time when my brain is already full of all kinds of information. So I'm trying to wedge aviation in there, and everything I learn in aviation has to be compared and sorted and classified according to all the other things I've learned over 52 years. So it's been talk about being a challenge. It's been exhilarating and wonderful. I'll keep on the aviation track for a minute, and then I'll tell folks what I do when I'm not a student pilot. But I got into flying because I had a crippling fear of flying. So much so that, a simple flight, I live in the Boston area now, to go back home to see my home folks in Chicago, I would have catastrophic thoughts for weeks prior to that flight on any major U.S. carrier. It didn't matter who I was flying. Catastrophic thoughts, racing heart, near panic attack, just white knuckling it through these flights, even while I knew that it was the safest form of transport in commercial aviation. So I realized something had to be done. Among the many things I did, which we will explore on some future episode of the podcast, I said, well, maybe I should go up in a small general aviation airplane. And that in and of itself was a huge experience, getting in the small plane, as I was terrified of any airplane. But I can tell you that once the wonderful flight instructor, thank you very much, encouraged me to take the controls, I took the controls, And I was looking out at the Blue Hills, which are right in front of Boston. I could see the Atlantic Ocean sort of, waving away in the distance. And I could see that sort of rugged, stoic coastline and that city of Boston. And something in me just kind of sprang open, and that fear just turned into love. And I was like, now what? Now I'm in love with this. So now what do I do? So I'm getting my initial little certificate. I have soloed. I'm doing the solo stage of training right now, and hopefully do those solo cross countries this winter. So there's more to that story later. But before all this happened, what I do every day is that I'm a writer, I'm a music educator, and a yoga educator. So, as a writer, I write mostly about yoga. I have a regular column in the Integral Yoga magazine. I've also written for some Buddhist magazines, Meditation Magazine, Boston Globe, etc., etc. But my whole first career was as a classical clarinetist, a very demanding job. And I started that when I was pretty much in the 7th grade. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I was very driven from a young age. So after much convincing, my parents said, yes, you can go to an arts academy. So I went up to Interlochen Arts Academy in Northern Michigan for high school, then on to Eastman School of Music and University of Michigan degrees in clarinet performance. So I was what we call a clarinerd, and absolutely love performing. However, performing was very transitory in its like thrill level. I would do the performance and be on like that high. And then the next day I'd be like, okay, now what? And all the way from 7th grade on, I had always had students off and on. But I noticed that the high I got from teaching was enduring, and I would just be glowing for days. So I said, I think after many years performing all around the world and doing all of that, I said, I think I'm actually supposed to be a teacher. Had to sort of begrudgingly admit that I'm a 2nd-generation teacher, and that is really where my heart lied. So at that point, I turned my attention away from the concert stage and taught clarinet, music theory, music history, all of the good music things on the college level for about 10 years. Along the way, I became a board-certified music therapist because it was a way to explore the effect that music has on the brain and our behavior. So as a music therapist, I worked in the health profession to provide services to folks in memory care units, people living with Parkinson's, folks overcoming stress and anxiety. You can sort of see why I might be here. I worked with kids a lot with special needs, helping them to regulate their emotional lives, et cetera, work with hospital radiation patients, on and on and on. So while all of this was happening, I fell in love to a great guy and then moved to where I am now, which is southeastern Massachusetts. And when I moved here, I made another turn of my career because I had always been doing yoga as a way to manage the stress and anxiety of a high performance classical music career. And along the way, I had discovered it as a whole lifestyle and as a way to just be a more calm, easeful, helpful, happy person. So it really developed into a whole lifestyle. So when I moved here to Massachusetts, I started working at another conservatory and served as their chair and actually founded their therapeutic yoga department. So we provided yoga to people of all different abilities. Basically, I describe it like anyone who wasn't comfortable going to a traditional studio class. That's who we taught. So we taught kids with autism, adults with special needs who are in day rehabilitation programs, adults with special needs, worked a lot with folks, especially women recovering from cancer or living with cancer. And most of my classes are full of very stressed out people who have driven themselves into the ground with their own high performance lifestyle, not pilots, but folks who have had really demanding careers and are finding in their 50s and 60s a high level of burnout. A lot of them kind of find me. So that's kind of where I'm at. And right now I teach all on my own. I have my own private studio here at my place, and I teach in community centers. So I teach yoga. I teach music. When I'm not doing that, I'm writing. If I'm not doing that, I'm flying. And that's me in a nutshell.
So you're not busy at all.
You know what's interesting? I was talking to a former student the other day who is now a classical clarinetist in his own right. And I said, you know what? No matter what I'm doing, I feel like it's all the same thing. It's all managing my own mind, my own body, my own breath, and being present and engaged with what I'm doing. The actual concrete skills of if I'm, using the rudders, or if I'm teaching someone a yoga pose, or if I'm sitting in meditation, those are just the external techniques. But really, what it all is helping me do is learn myself better, learn more about the universe, and sort of connect to myself even more. So the outside stuff changes all the time, but what I'm doing on the inside is the same, regardless of whatever skill set I'm playing with. It's all one thing in my brain, anyway. So when you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to do a podcast," I was like, I think we might have something here. Maybe it'd be helpful for folks if you share a little bit more now about where you see that need, where you see this podcast sitting, especially you are the professional pilot. What's that need? What
Well,
created
depending
that
on
for you?
who knows me, they may use that word loosely. It all sort of depends.
From where I sit, I'm like, whoa, look at what he does. I'm thrilled when I get signed off to go out of the pattern on my own. I'm at that level. So to me,
Right.
you're like, you're all there, man. You're total pro.
Well, so all of this is a collection of several different ideas. I mean, it first and foremost, I think ultimately this whole thing started almost a year ago when you and I did an interview for More Right Rudder.
Yes.
Your instructor is one of the board members currently for the National Association of Flight Instructors.
Yes.
And, that it's funny how all those things kind of come together. Well,
yeah.
You and I were speaking about the commonalities between a yoga instructor and a flight instructor, and how flight instructors could use those techniques or those skills to sort of better improve what they do. I was doing this whole series on people who teach different things and what can we steal from those different things to make us better.
Yeah.
And I think that episode was great. So if anybody's interested, you can still find that on the More Right Rudder page. But it kind of planted an idea. And, I think at that point, I sort of knew that I was looking to kind of simplify my life and eventually exit NAFI, very positively, of course, but exit NAFI. And kind of at the time, I thought I was going to sort of drift off into obscurity. Self-decided obscurity. Little did I know I get bored very easy. You take that idea and then you also pass it into the idea that, for better or for worse, I'm a millennial. And millennials, we like to whine about a lot of stuff, and I'm probably going to do it for the next 30 seconds, but we've had a lot of stuff happen to us. Every time we seem to think that things are back on track, there's a global war, there's a pandemic, there's I graduated college in 0809, which is not a great time to be anybody, but certainly not a pilot.
Right.
So there's been, a lot of forwards and backwards in sort of my career progression as a pilot in general. And thinking about those different steps and thinking about what anybody goes through, regardless of what generation they're a part of, each different career progression moment comes with its own challenges of trying to figure out, well, what am I doing? Am I good enough for this? What happens if I fail? What happens if this and that and the next thing? And that really struck me when I made the jump from flight instructor to an airline pilot. Because it's a big jump between, in my case, a Cirrus SR-20 into a CRJ 900. You go from a airplane that can hold 4 people on a good day to something that can hold 75 people plus a crew of 5.
Yeah, it's a serious level up. Yeah, that must
right. And
mentally,
that's just,
yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility. It's a lot of pressure. And, then you kind of continue to progress into more and more things, which again, we'll get to later. But fast forward to now, as we started this podcast, we started by talking about the idea that the FAA is starting to address some pilot mental health stuff and aviation as a whole, or even our entire sort of civilization as a whole, is starting to kind of speed up to these things. And I think that that's important, but I think there's a giant piece missing. I think it's important to discuss these things because if nobody talks about it, then it further increases any kind of stigma that there might be, and it just doesn't push the ball forward. But if there aren't solutions, if there aren't coping mechanisms, if there aren't ways of making you better, then talking doesn't do much. It almost further makes it worse, because now you're acknowledging that there's a problem, but you have no solution for it. And you take that concept and then you look at the mental performance of a pilot. Well, what do we need to do on a day that I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, I flew to Las Vegas. It was a day trip. We were flying back home the next day. My dog died that day.
Oh boy.
And what do you have to do as a pilot? You've got to take that and you've got to crumble it up into a nice little ball and push it as far down as you can push it, because in that moment, I've got to be thinking about what I'm doing. I got to fly this airplane. I've got to make sure that myself and my passengers who are relying on me to do my job are safe.
Yeah.
And so, the point of all of this is when these things happen, when life happens, when stress happens, when fatigue happens, I think it's imperative that those that know how to teach coping mechanisms to increase your performance, it's a huge asset to people who might not have any idea what to do. And ultimately, as pilots, we're always looking for that next edge. How do I make that next recurrent easier? How do I make my check ride easier? How do I make just flying into difficult situations easier? I want to be the best I can be. Well, any little feather in my cap that I can get to make myself better, I'm going to take it. And so the genesis of all of this was I was delayed actually on an airline flight out of Atlanta for like 3 hours. And that's when I started bombarding you with text messages going, hey, I've been thinking about this for a while. You know all these things. Maybe you might be willing to share these things with other pilots. So,
well, yeah. Wow.
And the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, I remember that the text you sent, and I was in my backyard. It was one of those moments where you're like, I remember, because before I even read, there was a number of texts there, but before I even read through all of them, it was like all caps. The immediate answer was yes, absolutely. It's so interesting to me, coming to flying in midlife, not having expected to do it. I was very comfortable in my career. I was very happy being at the sort of the top of my career and blah bitty blue. But, really sort of being at that midlife stage of I have it figured out and I can teach, and I'm very comfortable being in this place, and being so brought to my knees by this fear that was so out of the blue and made no sense to me. And I knew that it didn't make sense, but yet I still had it. How can you reconcile what's going on in the mind there? That when you said, I think there's something here that can help other folks, I said, raise my hand for service every time, because the general aviation community for me has done nothing but open its arms and say, oh, absolutely, you can do this. Of course you can. Why couldn't you? Rather than a little bit of what I was maybe expecting of, oh, you have a fear, you better get away from us now. So to me, I think I have a counterpoint to what you were saying about conversation. And this is why I think where we can be of service to people, just that we have a counterpoint to everything. There's John's view and then there's Gita's view. And dear listener, you decide what works for you, disregard the rest, right? You know how to do that. So I hear your point that endless conversation can be its own sand pit or like mud trap. You just get sucked into it. And then you're just like endlessly complaining or kvetching about everything that's wrong. However, from my perspective, conversation, connection, and saying the difficult things out loud is a primary path to freedom from having those things control you without your consent. So when I had a fear of flying and I didn't tell anybody, I was way weaker than when I called up my now CFI and said, I am really terrified of flying. Would you be willing to even meet with me and just talk about flying? Those are two different people. The one who pretends that nothing is going on, but is suffering in silence and is guiding your motivations without your consent because you're so blocked it away, versus the person who says, hey, I have this fear, but I'm willing to carry it openly and figure out a way to manage it. Those are kind of, so for me, and I would argue for a lot of the women I know, honestly, not to be too gender biased about it, because I know there are men who fall into this too, but for women, having the conversations is an agent of change. So I don't want to lose that for sake of just being like, I'm going to teach you a meditation technique that's going to make you fly better. And there you go. Because like sometimes just admitting that you're afraid or that, hey, my dog died, I might need a little extra support today. Those are actually the conversations I'd like to have. And I know now, even though I'm a baby pilot, I know and understand that aviation by nature is going to be resistant to change. I think that's a good thing because we know what works and we know what keeps us safe. Like we can't be like fail fast like they do like in the venture capital, world. Like let's just throw it out there and see what happens. Like we can't do that. However, just saying like, well, this is how we've always done it, push down the fact that your dog died and deal with it later. That's not going to be productive if we want to carry ourselves forward. I think experimenting and innovating with our training of the mental side, of the pilot wellness side, can only help improve the safety margins and could potentially be counted in future lives saved, both the passengers, both the pilots, but also the pilots' lives themselves, because you can be a high-performing pilot, but if your personal life is in shambles, then what do you have?
100%. And I think that also, something that we have come to really understand in the world of social media is it's very easy to only show the good parts. And especially for those that are aspiring to be airline pilots, to be corporate pilots, or whatever it is that they might be, they look at somebody like me or like an airline guy or gal or whatever. Boy, you look like you have it all together.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that I don't, but I also, some of that is just you hide the things that maybe aren't going so well. And so where I agree, certainly talking definitely helps, is it expresses the fact that you can feel like you have it all together, but still have things that you're working on. And
Correct.
that makes people who are trying to figure out how you made it to where you are feel a little bit better about themselves, because, well, how do you just ignore the fact that check rides are stressful? Well, some of it is experience. Some of it is you just get numb to the pressure. And some of it is you just get better. And so it does become easier. But I know people that'll say, oh, it's just a check ride. It's just another recurrent. It's no big deal. And maybe some of them believe it. But if you don't feel a slight tinge of nervousness, or you want to say that you don't, I think you're lying to me. Because, I mean, we all know that these things are important. We all want to do our best. Pilots tend to be type A. Mistakes are not things that we particularly care for.
Yeah.
And, we're all in search of that perfect flight. So I think that it's important to share the fact that we all have our struggles despite the public face that we have.
Yes. I think normalizing these discussions across all the sectors of the pilot community is essential for really moving forward. And I look at some of the things that come down through the FAA, and when I compare it to what I was doing, particularly as a music therapist, because I was working at behavioral health centers, I was working at what you would call quote unquote the psych ward, which I don't really like, but people who are being sectioned there, working in sort of more institutional places. And then I also compare that to what I'm doing with therapeutic yoga. which is also working within the public school. So again, in the public sector and places that are, really have a high degree of accountability and data-driven outcomes. I look at the FAA stuff, I'm like, ooh, it seems a little 20th century to me. It seems like where I was at. And that's not to slam the FAA at all, because again, I think moving slowly is good. Being resistant to change is good. But I think there is room for improvement there. And I think it starts in conversations like this that you and I are having right now with the future guests that we have, but especially I'm thinking of the generation now, the young John Niehaus now, who's in 7th grade going, what do I want to be when I grow up? And thinking maybe a pilot. And then they go on their first discovery flight and they're terrified. And maybe they're encouraged actually to admit it. They're thinking, oh, this is it. It's all over. I got scared. I'm never going to be able to be a pilot. But if that CFI, that flight instructor, can normalize that, it changes the level of the whole conversation then, so that we are dealing with how we're actually feeling instead of pretending that we're not feeling that way. Because we rarely fool people for long. And unfortunately, the body, if you fool people long enough that I'm doing okay when you're not doing okay, eventually your body will reveal the truth. And I say this as someone who's been teaching yoga for 30 years. Again, I work with the folks who, when they sort of wash up on the other end of burnout, your body always knows the score. So please don't show up into my studio. And this is where I give the caveat. I'm just me. I'm a teacher. I'm just sharing what I know as a human being. I'm not here to give any expert opinion and say, Gita said I should breathe this way and I'll feel awesome. Follow the wisdom of your own higher intelligence. Please filter everything both of us are saying through the lens of your own intelligence. If you're going to make any massive changes to your life, talk to a doctor, talk to a therapist, talk to a physical therapist. We're just here to sort of provide our experience of our guests. And that's it. There's a huge limit to sort of what I can do here. So I want to give that little caveat there.
And I am definitely not a doctor. I worked for a pilot back right after college who actually, and this is a story for another day, but who actually did pretend to be a doctor for about 20 years.
Oh boy.
I'm not that guy. So I am not a doctor. Do not take medical advice from me.
I should also address the other little piece, which I probably should have said in my bio, which is, hopefully it will become apparent, but yoga to me might be something very different to someone who's either never done it before or only ever sort of seen it represented on TV or in social media. Yoga to me is a comprehensive lifestyle system for being more peaceful, having more ease, and being a more useful person. As my lineage founder would say, he would say, yoga is not about standing on your head. It's about standing on your own 2 feet. So I use the techniques of meditation, physical postures, breathing, diet, lifestyle, what I read, what I watch, who I hang out with, as ways to help me live from sort of my higher intelligence, that sort of best part of myself. That's what it's really about. So don't worry, I'm not going to make you do bendy yoga poses, because that's not really where I'm at. It's exactly what you're talking about, John, about don't just sit around and have conversations about philosophy. Learn how to actually embody that resilience yourself. And I think that's a key word that we sort of keep dancing around, but that I hear us both sort of talking about. We're teaching and talking about how to be resilient. It's not about the absence of stress or the absence of anxiety or the absence of having things like your dog pass on a day that you are about to fly, but it's how can we increase the envelope of resiliency for pilots so that no matter what is going on for them and where they find themselves in their flying career, they can handle it.
Yeah, and as we're talking about some of these resiliency type things, I know there's no quick fix, although I'm still searching for one.
Yes, you are.
but if there are things that make it better, again, allow you to have an easier time memorizing things if you're studying for a check ride. or allow you to fall asleep faster if you need to performance sleep, because in my case, you're a 3-man crew and I got 2 hours to get as much rest as I possibly can after having been sort of wired for the last 4 hours. So any of these skills are going to be great things for pilots to learn. There's a friend of mine that teaches performance breathing to athletes so that they can perform better under stress. And those are things that you and I have talked about. And I think that would benefit pilots immensely, especially as they prepare for stressful situations. Again, that extra edge to make you a little bit better in the times where it's really, really important. Now, that all said, there's a flip side to this. Back to the silver bullet idea. When I was transitioning to my first turbine airplane, it was an extremely stressful moment for me. And I started searching for anything and everything, no matter how crazy it sounded, to, help bring that heart rate down, pull it from feeling it in my throat as I walked to something anybody else would classify as normal. So, I tried things like, binaural sound beats and various candles and all kinds of crazy stuff to just breathe a little bit easier and make dealing in that moment of staring down my future and everything that I had hoped to accomplish a little bit better. And so through all of that, I think everybody at one point or another has been inundated with various things on their social media or just in general of, oh, well, if you do this, then you're going to sleep better. If you do that. So I want to try some of this stuff. In fact, I may or may not have already started because I think it's a funny story. And B, if I can try some of these things and tell you that it doesn't work, then it means that you don't have to try these things. And so if you listen to the trailer, there was a little bit of a beat on there about stress relieving bed sheets. And no, that's not a euphemism. It is literally bed sheets you plug into the wall and it's supposed to make you sleep better. Well, I've got them and I tried them. So that's something we'll talk about later.
These are the things that give yogis like me a bad name. That's why people look at me and they go, oh, you're so woo woo. I'm like, no, stress relieving bed sheets are woo woo. I have a 4,000-year-old wisdom tradition that is proven to work over and over and over, the original behavioral science. So I reserve the right to make endless fun of you and all the things you try.
I mean, it's one of those things, back to what I said in the beginning. They seem to do okay for themselves and don't work very hard. If sleeping is something I can plug into the wall, then why not?
No, I think it's actually, I think you're right that it's like really fun to try things like that. And you never know, there can be elements of truth in some of the products that are out there. And certainly there's been some apps and things that you've sent my way. And I go, there are some grains of truth to a lot of this. But I think what I hear you kind of cutting close to is that it's that idea of like, if we're struggling enough, then we will reach for things like the Calm Cockpit, or we will reach for the magical stretch you can do before bed to get better rest. That suffering is actually a really great teacher. So if you're a pilot out there and you're like, you're at that like point of burnout and stress, I look at that as actually a good thing, because it means you're probably going to be open to trying some new things and saying, why not try and see what can happen? What could be a positive outcome of this? Some of my best students have been the ones who are going through the worst situations because they have actually hit the wall of realization that all the career, name, and fame did not bring me happiness. Now what? I got everything I wanted and I still feel restless or anxious, or as you said, I'm still chasing that next goal. What else is there to life? That's actually like a really great like learning place to be. So I know it doesn't feel that way when you're suffering. You want it just to be relieved and you want to get away from the feeling. But actually some of the practices that I'll offer and share actually help us lean into things like fear and stress and anxiety and actually befriend them because the only way out is through. Maybe this is a good point where we can talk a little bit then about how we're actually going to structurally offer this stuff to folks.
Agreed. But
Okay.
I want to say one thing about
Oh
what you
boy.
just said,
Oh boy.
because I liked it. A
Oh
little
boy.
bit of
Oh,
a
you
light
liked it.
bulb.
Shoo! Thought we were going to come to blows in episode 1.
No. I think it's a good tagline. Stress relieving bed sheets are expensive. The Calm Cockpit's free. Start here. Anyways, moving on.
Yeah, literally all the things that I will ever share and teach are free and portable. They just require you to show up and be disciplined, which I've come to find out pilots are really good at doing that. All right. So, what are we going to do? We're going to release an episode every other week. Yeah.
Yes.
That seems reasonable for both of our schedules. As he just said, one episode format's going to be John sharing all the crazy stuff he's trying. No, but sharing more of our personal stories. I have, more to unpack with the fear of flying. I think that's a really important story. And the more I talk to other pilots, the more I find out it's actually kind of common. Maybe they're just admitting to me because I'm a safe person to tell that they have that fear. But there's actually some stuff to dig into there. And I'd like to hear a little bit more of some of your backstory, John, and dig into some of the struggles that you faced and how you worked through that. I think that would be so helpful for pilots who are just coming onto the line now to hear how you handled sort of that transition.
Mm-hmm.
What's our other episode format?
Well, we know a lot of people in the industry. We've been around long enough.
Means John knows a lot of people.
Well, been around long enough to have met some really interesting, really cool people. Especially through my time at NAFI, I was blessed with meeting people that the normal pilot person doesn't normally get to shake hands with. And so I think that there's some really cool stories of other people who have accomplished some things and had some things happen to them that can share their stories, as well as professionals in other areas, professionals that can share techniques in what they do in their careers that are these, again, actionable skills that the pilots can put into practice to improve whatever it is that they're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to conversations with other experts. And I have be also on like a nutritionist, which I think is such a valuable thing. I've seen some of the way y'all eat. I'm like,
oh, we're terrible.
What?
Especially, yeah, especially when you're locked into the airlines and you've got nothing but airline food and McDonald's and. Yeah. I really loved Popeyes while I was there. Boy, that's not good for you.
Love that chicken from Popeyes. Yeah, Belly by Popeyes.
So, we don't eat the best, and I'd be lying to you if one of our flight attendants doesn't keep a case of Red Bull on the airplane for us.
Oh boy.
So, yeah, there's some nutritional issues there.
Yeah, there's maybe there's room for growth. Let's say it that way.
Inward, not outward.
Yeah, right. Inward growth. And also women aviators. I have a wonderful woman. She's a nutritionist, but also specializes in women's health issues, childbirth, and then also menopause, which are two major things that women go through. And if you're right in the middle of building a career and you take the time off to have the baby, it comes at a high physical cost. If you're a woman like me who's learning how to fly while going from perimenopause and through menopause, you will experience what happens to your brain and body chemistry during that. It is profound. So I love to have some experts on to talk about particularly women's health, because there's so much more that we can do to support that, normalize that, and just make it part of stuff that we do without it being something that we have to sort of hide away and pretend isn't happening. I think, again, let's bring it out into the open, talk about the strategies, and just make it like a no-brainer that we're going to support ourselves in those ways. John, you had an idea for me to do some bonus episodes.
Yeah. So I think that, again, back to the fatigue idea, there were things that I mentioned to you where I said, boy, I read a article a year or two ago about the U.S. Army that they have a technique that teaches their soldiers how to fall asleep very, very quickly. I think it's within like 2 minutes or something. And Because when you're at war, you sleep when you can and get as much of it as quickly as possible. Boy, that would be really helpful. And and you said that those were kinds of things that you actually might have some experience in. So
I do. Yes.
bonus episodes for techniques and actual sort of light sessions, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think we'll throw that out there to folks. We'll see what's useful, see what you guys like. We can always do more of things. Usually when I offer these to students and dear listeners, people sort of find what they like, and then I end up doing more of those. So I have absolutely a lot of experience in leading techniques for rest and then leading techniques for sleep, which are actually two separate things, which we can talk about at another point. But then also breathing exercises for enhancing focus, meditations for mental clarity, visualizations to help sort of down regulate the nervous system if it's gotten itself into a fight or flight moment, or something unexpected has happened and you find that you're sort of losing a little bit of control of just the autonomic nervous system, the heart rate and the breath is going fast. Techniques that you can train before that happens so that if it does happen, you can slow everything on down because you've trained this technique. So I'm just going to record those. We'll put them out there. They'll all be under 15 minutes. Listeners, you can experiment with them. What you want more of, we'll do more of. It's really going to be guided by what pilots actually find useful. So I'm looking forward to that because it's kind of what I do every day. So when John said, hey, you want to do that? I'm like, that's pretty much every day. I'm teaching people breathing, how to rest. My high school students said the other day, they came into class, high school freshmen. So can you picture this? Like 30 of them bust into the room on a Friday, the last class of the week I have them. They come busting into the room and they go, are we going to do that sleeping thing again? I was like, yes, we will absolutely do that. But first you have to do the whole rest of the class. But then I will lead a guided relaxation. And it's great fun and I think very effective. And once you learn how to do these things, then you know how to do it for yourself and you don't need to listen to the recordings anymore. They're all very simple to learn. It just requires practice and discipline.
I think it's going to be great.
Me too. So anything else we want to cover today? Did I miss anything?
Think that's kind of the bulk of it in a nutshell.
Awesome.
You know, I think we're excited to share experiences and
yes,
we've got a lot to talk about.
I think so. And I think I'm really looking forward to listeners hearing your thoughts, your ideas, what you'd like to hear more of, or if you're someone that has an experience you'd like to come on and share, please reach out to us. We're absolutely take a lot of our cues for what we're going to talk about from other people, because this is really like to consider this a community. And although we both have some expertise, we're really just providing the venue and the space to begin having the conversations and learn the strategies to move us all forward. So how can people find us, John?
Well, so our email is calmcockpit@gmail.com. And we are at calmcockpit.com. So if you want to find a website that hasn't been built yet, you can go there. There will be something there soon. And I believe we're both at Facebook and Instagram, also at, you guessed it, Calm Cockpit.
Yes. And I believe on social that we're Calm Cockpit Podcast.
Oh, thank you for the correction.
You'll find us Facebook and Instagram. And if you would be so kind, dear listeners, leave us a review with all the stars. If it's anything less than all the stars, reach out to us first. Send us that email and tell us what we can do to make this better. This is a brand new adventure for us. But if you did like it, please leave a review. I think that will really help drive those algorithms to help other people find us. Even more importantly, I have found that the pilot community is a lot of people supporting people. So if you have that one friend that you always talk to about this kind of stuff, please let them know personally about the podcast, because that's the way we spread the word, is pilot to pilot, saying, hey, have you heard this thing? Really looking forward to having those conversations.
I agree. It's going to be a journey.
It's been fantastic already. Amazing. So are we calling that a wrap on the official episode 1?
I think we're done.
Excellent.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Calm Cockpit, everybody. In the meantime, fly smarter and stress less.
Our one departure is Airbus 321. Traffic holding crossing runway 33 left, 3 left.